An undercover CEO orders a pizza from his own restaurant and is surprised to hear an employee share their financial struggles. Witnessing the employee's bravery and honesty, the CEO is moved to take action and help them overcome their challenges. This CEO thought he knew everything about his pizza business, but a single interaction with an employee changed his perspective forever. See what happens when honesty and empathy collide in this heartwarming story. It was just past 5 p.m. when Mark Dalton zipped up his weathered hoodie and stepped out of his black SUV, parked a few blocks away from the downtown location of Slice Spot Pizza. For most people walking by, he looked like an average middle-aged guy. Faded jeans, baseball cap pulled low, no signs of wealth or status. But behind that disguise was the founder and CEO of a rapidly growing pizza chain with over 50 locations and counting. Mark had built the business from scratch, starting in his college dorm room with a borrowed oven and a ridiculous obsession with getting crusts just right. Over the years, he'd become the kind of CEO who mostly lived in boardrooms and on spreadsheets. But something had been bothering him lately. Sales were steady, sure. Growth was on track, but employee turnover, too high. Morale, too low. He'd read the HR reports, seen the surveys, even nodded thoughtfully during staff meetings. But deep down, he knew he was missing something. So he'd decided to go undercover. No camera crew, no corporate marketing stunt, just him, walking into one of his own restaurants, pretending to be a first-time customer. He wanted to see what it really felt like to work there, to serve and be served, to feel what his people felt. The restaurant was busy, full of chatter and the rich smell of melted cheese and tomato sauce. It was Friday night, the dinner rush, and the staff was clearly in the zone. Mark stepped in quietly, taking his place at the end of the line. He glanced around the store. Nothing seemed out of place. Floors clean, kitchen staff moving fast, the front counter team handling orders like a well-oiled machine. That's when he saw her. Behind the counter stood a young woman, no older than her mid-20s, wearing the standard red Slice Spot cap and apron. Her name tag read Jess. Her face looked tired, more than just end of a long shift tired. It was the kind of tired that sits behind your eyes when life keeps swinging and you've got no shield left to raise. Jess smiled politely as Mark stepped forward. "Hi there. Welcome to Slice Spot. What can I get started for you tonight?" He ordered a simple pepperoni personal pizza and a soda. She rang it up, handed him a receipt and said, "Should be ready in about 10 minutes. Mark stepped aside and watched her. She moved quickly, but with a quiet heaviness, like every step was just slightly harder than it should be. And even though she was smiling at customers, there was something in her eyes that didn't match. When his order came up, she handed him the box and drink, then added, almost without thinking, "Hope you're having a better night than me." He paused, surprised. "Tough shift?" Jess shrugged. "Nah, the shift's fine. Just life. Rent's due, my kid's sick, and I'm working doubles just to keep the lights on. Same story, different day." There was no bitterness in her voice, no self-pity, just honesty. Tired, blunt honesty. The kind you don't expect to hear from a stranger, much less from an employee at your own store. Mark looked at her, unsure how to respond without breaking cover. "That's rough. I'm sorry to hear that." Jess gave a half-smile. "It's all good. We just keep going, right?" He nodded slowly, the box of pizza suddenly feeling heavier in his hands. Yeah, we do." He walked out into the cool evening air, but his thoughts stayed behind. Something about that moment, that one simple exchange, gripped him harder than any number on a balance sheet ever had. He had come here expecting to see how the shop ran, maybe get a glimpse of team culture. He hadn't expected to be seen by someone who didn't know who he was, and he definitely hadn't expected her story to stick with him like this. As he reached his car and set the untouched pizza on the passenger seat, Mark sat in silence. His fingers gripped the steering wheel, but he didn't start the engine. Instead, he looked back toward the restaurant, heart heavy and thoughts racing. He had work to do. Mark didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse apartment, a space that felt too large, too quiet, and suddenly too distant from the real world he'd stepped into just hours earlier. Jess's words kept replaying in his head. Rent's due, my kid's sick, and I'm working doubles just to keep the lights on. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Calm, resigned, like she had long stopped expecting life to get easier. And that haunted him. He'd built Slice Spot to be more than a business. It was supposed to be a place where people worked hard and were treated well. But what kind of leader was he if someone like Jess was drowning on his watch? By morning, he had made up his mind. This wasn't going to be a story he pushed to the back of his brain, behind boardroom strategies and quarterly reviews. This was personal now. He needed to see more. He needed to feel more. He returned to the store the next evening. Same hoodie, same cap, same low profile. This time, he sat down in the far corner with a slice of cheese pizza and watched the room quietly. Jess was working again, her hair tied up this time, sleeves rolled higher. She was just as efficient, just as polite, and just as weighed down. After about half an hour, he saw her sneak out through the back door during her break. Without overthinking it, he followed, slowly, carefully. Outside, behind the building, she lit a cigarette and leaned against the brick wall. Her phone buzzed. She answered it instantly. "Hey, baby," she said gently. "You feel any better?" Mark stayed just out of sight, close enough to hear, far enough to keep his cover. "Mommy'll be home soon, okay? I'm proud of you for taking your medicine today. I know it's yucky, but you gotta stay strong for me, all right? Yeah? Good." There was a long pause. Jess exhaled, her voice dipping softer. "No, baby. We can't go back to Grandma's. She doesn't have space. And this job, it's all I got right now. If I lose this, we're in trouble." Another pause. Mark felt something clench in his chest. "Love you too, my little hero." She hung up and stood there for a moment, eyes closed, cigarette slowly burning in her fingers. Then she wiped her face quickly with the sleeve of her uniform and went back inside. Mark didn't move for a while. This wasn't just a hard-working employee having a rough week. This was a mother doing everything she could to survive, juggling bills, sickness, and shifts in a job that, apparently, was barely keeping her afloat. And he had to face the truth. Somewhere along the way, his company had grown cold. He'd lost sight of the people. The next morning, Mark showed up at the corporate office like a storm. He called in his HR head, his operations manager, and his regional supervisor, all into the boardroom. "I want a full report on employee wages, hours, benefits, everything, and I want it yesterday." They exchanged confused glances. "Something wrong, Mark?" He didn't sit down. "Yeah, something's very wrong. We've got team members working double shifts and still can't afford medicine for their kids. That's not just a business failure, that's a moral failure." One of the execs shifted uncomfortably. "We offer competitive hourly rates across all markets." "Stop!" Mark snapped. "Don't feed me the script. I don't want competitive. I want enough. Enough to live, to breathe, to stop breaking down in back alleys between shifts." Silence fell. Mark's voice lowered, but his tone was steel. "There's a woman named Jess working at the downtown location. Single mum, working her ass off while her kid is sick at home. If she's slipping through the cracks, I guarantee she's not the only one. So we're going to fix this, All of it. Starting now. No one said a word. They'd never seen him like this. Passionate? Yes. Strategic? Absolutely. But this was different. This was a man who'd walked into his own house and found it falling apart, and was now ready to rebuild it from the ground up. After the meeting, Mark made one more call, directly to the Slice Spot downtown manager. "I want to set up a meeting with Jess," he said. "But not as a CEO, not yet. I just want to talk, as a human." He hung up, already feeling the weight of the change he was about to bring, not just for her, but for everyone else like her.
2 days later, Jess sat nervously at a booth in the very restaurant where she worked nearly every night. The manager had asked her to come in for a chat during her time off, which was rare and suspicious. At first, she thought she'd made a mistake or missed a step on the register. Her anxiety kicked in almost instantly. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. Not with bills stacking up, and her son, Tyler, still recovering from the flu. She sipped the cup of water the manager had offered, her knee bouncing under the table. When the door opened and Mark walked in, she didn't recognize him at first. Not without the hoodie and baseball cap. Not with the clean-cut jacket, confident stride, and that sharp, purposeful look in his eyes. He approached the table gently. "Hey," he said, with a calm smile. "Mind if I sit?" Jess blinked, confused. Sure." He sat down, folding his hands on the table. "My name's Mark. You don't know me, not really, but I know you, Jess. I'm the CEO of Slice Spot." Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She blinked again, this time more sharply, like she needed to reset her brain. Then she laughed, but it was nervous. "Wait, you're serious?" He nodded. "Dead serious. I was in here the other night. Hoodie, cap, pepperoni pizza." She stared at him, stunned. "That was you?" "Yep." Jess leaned back, staring in disbelief. "You're the guy I told all that stuff to." Mark offered a warm, understanding smile. "You didn't know who I was. You weren't trying to make a point. You were just being honest. And that's why I'm here." She looked down, cheeks flushing. "God, I shouldn't have said anything. I didn't mean to dump that on a customer." "No," he said quickly. "Jess, you didn't dump anything. You gave me something. Something I didn't even realize I needed. The truth." Jess stared at him, heart pounding. She wasn't used to anyone, especially people in suits, talking to her like that. With respect, with softness. Mark leaned forward. "I started this company because I loved pizza. But over time, as we grew, I forgot that a business is only as strong as the people inside it. People like you. And I need to change that." She swallowed. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with me?" "It starts with you," he said. "You told me your son's sick, that you're working doubles to keep up. I can't let that slide. You shouldn't be living on the edge while working this hard." Jess sat in silence. No one had ever offered her more than sympathy. Not her last boss, not her landlord, not even her son's school. They all had policies, boundaries. She was used to pushing through. Alone. Mark continued. "I've already spoken to HR. We're implementing a new emergency fund for employees who need help, starting today. Medical bills, childcare, even temporary housing if needed. I've also ordered a full audit of our pay structure, especially for single parents, and team members working night shifts." Jess blinked hard. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he said. "But beyond all that, I wanted to do something personal. For you. If you're willing, we'll move you into a full-time supervisor role. Better hours, benefits, and a raise. And I want to make sure your son has everything he needs while he recovers. That's not charity. That's just fairness." Tears welled up in her eyes. She covered her mouth with her hand. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Mark said softly. "Just know this. Your honesty made me realize how disconnected I'd become. You reminded me what leadership is supposed to look like. Jess let out a shaky breath. Most people just walk past me. They don't listen. I'm not most people, he said, standing up and placing a gentle hand on the table. And I'm listening now. As Mark walked out of the restaurant, he didn't feel like a CEO anymore. He felt like a human being who'd finally started doing something right. And inside that booth, Jess sat still, heart pounding with something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. Jess walked home that night differently. Her steps felt lighter, her head held a little higher. The weight she'd carried for months, maybe even years, hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. For the first time in forever, she didn't feel invisible. She opened the apartment door to find Tyler curled up on their worn-out couch, a cartoon playing softly on the TV. He looked up, weak but smiling, his favorite superhero blanket tucked around his legs. "Hey, Mummy." "Hey, baby," she said, crouching beside him and brushing a hand across his forehead. "Still warm, but not as bad as before." "You look happy," he mumbled sleepily. She smiled, blinking back a tear. "Mommy's just really thankful today." That weekend, her promotion became official. She got her new schedule, no more exhausting back-to-back doubles, and her pay bump kicked in immediately. But it wasn't just the title or money. It was how everyone looked at her now. The other employees, some older, some younger, were curious. One of the younger guys, Rico, even pulled her aside. "Yo, Jess, what did you do? You got corporate, crawling over here like they're filming a documentary." She laughed and shook her head. "I just told the truth, I guess." Mark didn't stop at Jess. He'd sent a confidential survey across every store, and the responses he got broke his heart even more. There were employees working 2 jobs, some living in cars, others skipping meals so their kids could eat. The HR reports had never shown this kind of raw, real data. Because people didn't put suffering on paper, they kept it buried deep. That changed now. A week later, Slice Spot's intranet lit up with news. A sweeping employee-first initiative, the Slice Care program. It included flexible emergency assistance, mental health support, optional paid sick leave for part-time workers, and an immediate increase in base pay across all locations. There were even education grants and internal promotions prioritized, for those showing long-term commitment. The message from the CEO read simply, "This company runs on your hands, your hearts, and your hustle." I failed to see that clearly until someone brave enough showed me. I won't make that mistake again. It didn't take long for word to spread. Some said it was PR, some said it was guilt, but those who worked the late nights flipped dough until their wrists ached and wore uniforms stained with marinara. They knew this wasn't noise. This was change. Real change. Back at the downtown store, Jess embraced her new role with a quiet pride. She started checking in with staff differently, asking deeper questions, offering support even when no one asked for it. One night, she stayed behind after her shift just to listen to a teenager named Mallory cry in the walk-in cooler over failing her college entrance exams. "You're more than this job," Jess whispered to her. "But while you're here, you've got people who care." Later that week, Mark returned to the restaurant, this time not in disguise. He didn't announce himself, didn't bring a camera crew or a board of directors. He walked in, grabbed a slice, and sat at a corner table, quiet, observing. Jess noticed immediately. She walked over with a grin. "No cap and hoodie today," he smirked. "Guess the undercover gig's over." She slid into the seat across from him, this time without fear. "You keeping your promise?" Mark looked around at the staff, laughing. Near the oven, a manager helping a trainee fix the receipt printer, and customers chatting like this was more than just a food stop. It was a place they wanted to be. "I'm trying," he said honestly. "You gave me a mirror, Jess, one I didn't know I needed. I didn't like what I saw in it, but I'm grateful." Jess nodded. "You didn't have to come back, but you did." He looked at her, seriously now. "Because this isn't about Charity. It's about responsibility. If I'm going to lead, I need to see people, every single one of them. Jess smiled and looked out at the team. They'd been waiting for someone like that. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The pizza joint buzzed with life, warmth, and something you couldn't fake. Not in any press release or spreadsheet. Something real. In the weeks that followed, something began to shift across Slice Spot. Not just in policies, but in spirit. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was subtle. The kind of change you don't always see with your eyes, but you feel it. Employees started staying after shifts just to talk. Managers weren't just barking orders anymore. They were asking questions, listening more, even checking in on things that had nothing to do with sales or service times. For the first time in a long time, workers felt human again. At the downtown location, Jess was becoming something of a quiet legend. New hires were told about her by co-workers in whispered admiration. She's the one who talked to the CEO, you know, changed everything. She didn't wear that praise easily. Jess had never seen herself as a hero. She was just a mum trying to survive. But something in her had shifted too. She walked with a little more confidence. Her voice, once quiet and hesitant, was firm now, especially when she was standing up for someone else. One night, she caught Rico being chewed out by a shift lead from another store who'd been temporarily filling in. The guy had a clipboard and an ego the size of a billboard. "You didn't follow protocol," he barked. "You don't just make calls on substitutions, you ask me." "Got it." Rico, barely 20, looked humiliated. Jess stepped in, calm but unwavering. "Hey, we don't talk to people like that here." The guy scoffed. "Excuse me?" "You're excused," she said. "And if you've got an issue with how things run here, take it up with me, not him." The shift lead stared at her. "Who do you think you are?" Jess smiled. "I'm someone who knows what this place is really about, and I've got the CEO on speed dial, if you'd like to question that." The guy didn't say another word. He just turned around and walked off. Rico looked at her like she'd just pulled a sword from a stone. "Damn, Jess. That was, boss." She chuckled and gave his shoulder a light squeeze. "Nah, that was just right." Elsewhere in the company, the ripple effect of her conversation with Mark kept growing. Stores were reporting higher morale. Turnover started dropping. Even customer feedback was shifting. People were noticing the difference in energy, in how the employees treated them and each other. A few locations even began hosting monthly Slice family dinners, where employees and their families could eat together, no charge, just to feel appreciated. Mark made it a point to attend at least 2 of them a month. He no longer sat in the corner. He pulled up a chair, ate with the team, asked questions, real ones, and listened. Really listened. At one dinner, a delivery driver named Hank told Mark that the new fuel assistance program saved his car from being repossessed. "Honestly, boss," Hank said with a grin, "before this, I thought people like you only remembered our names when something went wrong." Mark's expression softened. "I did forget, but not anymore." Back at Jess's apartment, life was still tough, but it was no longer hopeless. Tyler was feeling better and had started drawing again. He'd even taped a crayon drawing to the fridge, one of his mom standing next to a pizza place with a crown on her head. "What's this, champ?" she asked, holding it up. "That's you," he said. "You're the queen of pizza." She laughed, tears pricking her eyes. "I'll take it." She tucked the drawing into her purse the next morning and brought it to work. She taped it up, in the staff area, right next to the schedule. No one touched it. No one dared. Mark saw it later that week during a surprise visit. He stared at it for a long moment, then turned to Jess. "That's the best corporate award I've ever seen," she smirked. "No speeches, please." But he did have one thought. "We should frame that," he said, "because sometimes a crown doesn't come from power. It comes from truth." And standing there in that tiny staff room, surrounded by old lockers and sauce-stained aprons, Jess smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. Months passed, But the story of Jess and the undercover CEO kept circulating quietly, almost like a legend inside the walls of Slice Spot. It wasn't plastered on billboards or bragged about in press releases. It lived in whispered conversations between team members, in the respectful way managers listened now, and in the subtle but powerful sense of dignity that had returned to the job. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they ran deep. Mark had gone all in. He rolled out programs that cost real money, things that made some board members nervous: emergency childcare stipends, mental health counseling, and a partnership with a local non-profit that helped employees facing eviction or domestic hardship. To many CEOs, it would have seemed excessive, but to Mark, it was the bare minimum. "You don't build a strong company by watching stock prices," he said in a regional meeting. "You build it by protecting the people who show up in aprons and ovens day after day when no one's watching." Still, not everyone embraced the new era easily. Some old-school managers resented the shift. One of them, a regional director who'd always boasted about tight margins and tighter fists, openly criticized the Slice Care program. "You're coddling them," he told Mark in a quarterly meeting. "People should earn their way, not expect handouts." Mark didn't flinch. "If someone's working 40 hours a week and still can't afford medicine for their kid, that's not a handout," he said. "That's us failing to earn them." The man was gone by the end of the week, quietly replaced. Jess, meanwhile, was thriving in her new role. She'd gone from supervisor to assistant manager and had begun mentoring new hires personally. It wasn't a title she cared about. It was the impact, and people felt it. New team members gravitated toward her, especially those who came in with the same kind of burdened eyes she used to carry. One of them was a 19-year-old girl named Layla, who'd run away from home and was couch surfing while trying to finish. Her GD Jess found her crying one day in the bathroom, a half-written resignation letter crumpled in her hands. "I can't do this," Layla said. "It's too much. Everything's too much." Jess sat beside her on the tiled floor. "Hey, I used to cry on this exact floor more than once," she said with a soft laugh. "But someone saw me, and then I saw myself again. You're not alone here, okay? You stay, and I'll walk with you every shift." Layla stayed. And she did better than just stay. She started smiling again. Jess never mentioned these moments to Mark. She didn't think she needed to. But Mark heard about them anyway. From staff, from store managers, from the quiet culture that was growing under her example. One day, he showed up unannounced again. "Still making waves?" he teased, meeting her near the walk-in. Jess grinned. "I'm just keeping the oven warm." He pulled something from his coat pocket. A letter. Handwritten. "I got this from someone in your store," he said. "Didn't sign it, but they wrote about how you stopped them from quitting. Said you saved them." Jess blinked. "I didn't save anyone. You saved this company," he replied, one truth at a time. She looked down, unsure what to say. Mark smiled gently. "You know, I used to think leadership was about plans and projections. But it's just this, really. Being willing to hear someone. You taught me that." The air hung quiet between them for a second. Not heavy, just real. Mark finally added, "We're expanding again. New stores in 3 cities. I want you helping train the new staff. Maybe even think about running a district." Jess's eyes widened. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "They don't just need a manager. They need someone who sees them, the way you do." It was overwhelming, humbling, but she nodded. "I'll do it," she said. "But only if I can keep mentoring here too." Mark laughed. "Of course, this is your kitchen now." And just like that, Jess realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building, shaping, leaving fingerprints on a company that was learning how to care from the inside out. By the time spring rolled around, Jess had started visiting other Slice Spot locations. First as a guest, then as an unofficial ambassador of the culture change. She didn't walk in with clipboards or give lectures. She didn't need to. People listened because of who she was, not what she was. At a newly opened store in Phoenix, she stood beside a 17-year-old prep cook named Emilio, showing him how to keep the crust consistent under pressure during rush hour. A few feet away, the shift manager, fresh out of corporate training, watched quietly. "You're not like the usual reps they send from HQ," he said, handing her a drink. Jess smirked. "Probably because I'm not from HQ," he raised an eyebrow. "You're not corporate." "I'm field grown," she said, tapping her name badge. "Started on register at the downtown store." The shift manager let out a low whistle. "No wonder the team listens to you. You talk like someone who's been through it." Jess looked around at the busy store. Young kids trying to prove themselves. Tired single mums with soft eyes. Part-timers balancing school and rent. Yeah, she'd been through it. Later that week, she returned to her home store, where things had changed in ways she couldn't even have imagined a year ago. It was cleaner, brighter, not just physically, but in spirit. There were new faces, and somehow it felt like every single one belonged. Jess had helped create a place where people didn't feel like disposable labor. They felt seen. She caught up with Rico during closing. He was wiping down the prep counter, earbuds in, nodding to a beat only he could hear. "You're still here," she teased. He smiled, pulling one earbud out. "Someone's got to hold it down while the queen is off building her empire." Jess rolled her eyes. "Don't start with that." But he turned serious for a second. "Nah, really. You gave us something we didn't know we could have. You made this job feel like ours." She was quiet for a beat, then asked, "You thinking about moving up?" "Actually, yeah. Been shadowing the night lead. Think I might have a shot." "Good," she said, patting his shoulder. "You'll be great at it. Just remember, it's not about barking orders. It's about keeping your people from sinking." "Like you did." "Exactly." Meanwhile, back at headquarters, Mark was facing a different kind of pressure. Some investors were growing uneasy with the direction of the company. Profits were still strong, but the margins had tightened since the implementation of the Slice Care program. A few members of the board started pushing back. "Your people-first model is great for PR," one exec had said. "But long-term, we need leaner operations." Mark folded his arms across his chest. "You think the people who run this business are a liability? I think you're overcorrecting. One story doesn't define the whole company." Mark shook, his head slowly. "No, but one story woke me up. And it's not an overcorrection. It's a correction that should have happened years ago." The tension in the room was thick, but Mark didn't back down. "You want leaner? Try cutting back on the bonuses up here before you start slicing away at people who clean grease traps at 1 a.m. That meeting ended early, and the message was clear. Slice Spot was changing, and it was doing it on its own terms. Later that night, Mark called Jess. "You got a minute?" "For you? Always," she said, stepping outside while Tyler worked on homework at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking," Mark said, "about legacy." Jess leaned against the porch railing. "Big word." "Yeah," he chuckled. "But I mean it. When I'm gone, when my name's just a dusty signature on an old founder's plaque, I don't want people to remember the pizzas. I want them to remember that we gave a damn, that we built something that gave people their dignity back." Jess nodded slowly. "You're doing that already. So are you," he said. "You're the heart of this place, Jess. And I'm not saying that to flatter you. I'm saying it because someday I want you at this table. Not just managing stores, but helping lead the whole company." Jess was stunned silent for a moment. "You serious?" "As a heart attack." She laughed, but it was soft and shaky. "Wow, I don't even know what to say." "Don't say anything yet. Just think about it. All I know is you're not just changing stores anymore, you're changing lives." And in that moment, Jess looked out into the quiet street, her heart full in a way she hadn't known was possible. Not with fame, not with money, but with meaning. From the register to the rooftop, she had found her place. The final piece of the journey didn't arrive with fanfare. It came quietly, just as everything else had, with a choice. Jess stood outside the corporate building on a cool Monday morning, holding a simple manila folder under her arm. Inside, it was a formal offer letter, Regional Director, West Division. Mark had called it a stepping stone. We'll build you into whatever role you want. You've already got the heart. The rest is just polish. She'd spent the weekend thinking about it, not because she doubted herself. She didn't anymore. But because every step forward meant stepping away from something else. Her team, her store, the kitchen that had become her second home. She looked up at the tall, glass-fronted building that had once seemed a world apart from the hot ovens and late-night cleanup shifts. It didn't intimidate her now. It didn't impress her either. It was just another room. And maybe it was time she stepped inside. She took the elevator to the top floor, heart calm. Mark met her in the hallway, smiling wide but with a hint of nerves in his eyes, like a proud father waiting to see what path his kid would choose. "Well?" he asked, walking with her toward the conference room. Jess handed him the folder. He opened it slowly, then looked up. "You're in?" She nodded. "I'm in." Mark exhaled like he'd been holding his breath all morning. "Jess, this is going to change everything," she gave a small smile. "So let's change it." Over the next few months, Jess stepped into her new role like she'd always belonged there. She didn't wear suits. She didn't speak in buzzwords. She showed up to store audits in sneakers, listened more than she talked, and sat in break rooms with the crew during lunch instead of eating alone behind glass doors. She visited stores that were struggling with turnover, burnout, toxic managers, and she didn't bring punishment. She brought presence. She asked, "What's not working for you? What would make this feel more fair?" And people talked, really talked. She started a mentorship program across the division, paired veterans with rookies, created a story wall where employees could anonymously share their real struggles and wins, and others could respond, support, uplift. Every store had one now. She helped push through a new emergency leave policy, lobbied for a scholarship, fund for employee children. She worked with HR to eliminate petty attendance rules that penalized people for taking care of their families. She became known, not for being brilliant, not for being ruthless, but for being the person who showed up, who understood, who had once cleaned sauce off tile floors while her kid had a fever, and never forgot what that felt like. One evening, after a long day visiting stores across 2 states, she returned to her apartment to find Tyler waiting up. He was taller now, healthier, smarter. He smiled at her with the same look he used to give when she brought home a leftover slice. "You tired?" he asked, plopping beside her on the couch. Jess leaned her head back and sighed. "Always. But happy?" She looked at him, thought for a moment, then smiled. "Yeah, I think I am." He handed her a folded piece of paper, another drawing. This one was simpler, a pizza slice in the shape of a heart, with words scribbled in messy kid handwriting. "Thank you, Mom, you saved us." Her throat tightened. She didn't cry, but she held it close. Mark called her later that week. "We're looking at making some real structural shifts," he said. "You up for sitting on the core leadership team?" Jess didn't hesitate this time. "Yes, and..." So she rose again. From the floor to the kitchen. From the kitchen to the boardroom. But no matter how high she climbed, she never forgot where it started. With a tired woman behind a register, telling the truth to a man in a hoodie, who turned out to be the one person who actually listened. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was humanity. And in a world of cold margins and tight schedules, that had become the warmest thing Slice Spot had to offer. Real people, real stories, real change. All because one CEO ordered a pizza and stayed long enough to hear the truth behind the counter. The end.